The Zephyrian Empire stretched across 17 star systems, its crystalline ships cutting through space like jeweled daggers. For 3,000 years, the dragon-like Zephyrians had ruled with cold precision, their scaled hides reflecting the light of conquered suns. They felt nothing beyond duty, calculation, and the endless hunger for order that drove their expansion across the galaxy. Emperor Vaxen stood 8 feet tall, his midnight black scales rippling with bioluminescent patterns that marked his royal bloodline. His golden eyes, devoid of warmth, surveyed the bridge of his flagship as it approached the Sol system. Earth hung before them like a blue marble, beautiful and defenseless. "The humans have no unified government," reported his tactical officer, her voice a mechanical drone. "Their military technology is primitive. Estimated conquest time, 47 hours. Vaxen's tail twitched once in acknowledgement. Another species to catalog, another world to strip of resources, another civilization to fold into the Empire's endless machinery. He had overseen the subjugation of dozens of worlds. This would be no different. The first human ships that rose to meet them were pathetically small. Chemical rockets and crude energy weapons that couldn't even scratch Zephyrian shields. Vaxen watched with detached interest as his fleet's automated defenses swatted them aside like insects. Within hours, major population centers lay in ruins, and the surviving human governments transmitted their unconditional surrender, but something was wrong. As Vaxen's forces established occupation zones across Earth, reports began filtering back that confused his officers. Humans weren't behaving like other conquered species. They weren't cowering in their shelters or organizing desperate resistance movements. Instead, they were singing in the rubble of New York. A woman stood on a broken highway and sang a haunting melody to a group of children. In London, an old man played violin while Zephyrian war machines patrolled the streets. In Tokyo, a choir gathered in a bombed-out cathedral, their voices rising in harmony despite the ash falling like snow around them. "Why do they make these sounds?" demanded General Krex, Vaxen's military commander. "Our behavioral analysts cannot understand the purpose. It serves no tactical function. It doesn't aid in survival or resource gathering." Vaxen said nothing. He had noticed something else in the reports, something that made his scales itch with an unfamiliar sensation. Several Zephyrian soldiers had lingered near these singing humans longer than protocol required. Some had even requested extended patrol routes through areas where the musical gatherings occurred. 3 days after the conquest, Vaxen received a report that should have been routine. A human child, perhaps 8 years old, had been found in the ruins of a school. Standard protocol demanded the child be processed through relocation centers like all other survivors. But the soldier who filed the report included an unusual addendum: the child had been singing when found, and had continued singing even while being transported to the processing facility for reasons Vaxen couldn't explain. He ordered the child brought to his command ship. The human child stood in his private chambers, small and fragile among the towering crystalline walls. Her dark hair was matted with dust, her clothes torn, but her brown eyes held no fear. When 2 guards flanked her, she simply looked up at Vaxen with curious interest. "What is your designation?" Vaxen asked in the human language his translators had decoded. "My name is Luna," the child said. Her voice carried a musical quality even in normal speech. "Are you the Dragon King the grown-ups were talking about?" Dragon King? The translation algorithms had struggled with human metaphors, but Vaxen understood the comparison. His species had evolved from reptilian ancestors, and humans apparently saw the resemblance to creatures from their mythology. "I am Emperor Vaxen of the Zephyrian Empire. You now exist under my authority." The words felt strange in his mouth, heavier than usual. Luna tilted her head. "You look sad." The statement struck Vaxen like a physical blow. Sad? The concept had no meaning in Zephyrian society. Emotions were inefficiency, weakness, evolutionary throwbacks that his people had bred out of themselves millennia ago. Yet something in the child's voice and the way she looked at him stirred something deep in his chest. "I do not comprehend your statement," he said. "My mama used to look like that sometimes," Luna continued, unafraid. Before she would sing, she said music could make the sadness go away, even if just for a little while. Before Vaxen could respond, Luna began to sing. The melody was simple, wordless, but it seemed to wrap around him like warm light. For the first time in his 1,000-year life, Emperor Vaxen felt something crack inside the fortress of his mind. The sensation was so alien, so terrifying, that he staggered backward. "Stop," he commanded. But his voice came out as barely a whisper. Luna's song continued, and with each note, something ancient and buried stirred within Vaxen's consciousness. Memories that weren't memories flickered at the edges of his awareness. Images of young Zephyrians before the genetic modifications, before the emotional suppressors, before his species had chosen order over feeling. When Luna finally finished, the silence felt different. The air itself seemed changed, charged with possibilities Vaxen had never imagined. "Why did you do that?" he asked, his usual commanding tone replaced by something almost vulnerable. Luna smiled. "Because you needed it. Everyone needs music sometimes." As guards escorted the child away to temporary quarters, Vaxen stood alone in his chambers, staring at his reflection in the polished walls. For the first time in centuries, he found himself wondering what lay beneath the surface of absolute control and whether the Empire's greatest conquest might actually be its first defeat. The next few days passed like a fever dream for Emperor Vaxen. He found himself returning to Luna's quarters repeatedly, drawn by a compulsion he couldn't name or understand. Each time she would sing different songs, some her mother had taught her, others she claimed to have learned from dreams. Each melody chipped away at something fundamental inside him. His officers began to notice the changes. During strategy meetings, Vaxen would pause mid-sentence, his golden eyes unfocused, as if listening to sounds only he could hear. When General Krex presented casualty reports from resistance activities, Vaxen studied them with unusual intensity, asking questions about individual human lives rather than overall strategic impact. "Your Excellency," Krex ventured during one such briefing, "perhaps you should consider delegating these administrative details to subordinates. Managing a single conquered world typically requires less personal attention from the Emperor." Vaxen's scales darkened, a sign of agitation that hadn't appeared in decades. "These humans are unusual. Their behavior patterns require direct study." It wasn't entirely a lie. Human resistance movements across Earth had begun incorporating music into their activities in ways that baffled Zephyrian analysts. Rebels would sing while building improvised weapons. They organized flash concerts that somehow coordinated supply drops to hidden camps. Most disturbing of all, some Zephyrian soldiers had been found listening to these musical gatherings instead of dispersing them as ordered. 3 of his troops had already been court-martialed for conduct detrimental to imperial efficiency. But Vaxen found himself reluctant to authorize the standard punishment of neural reconditioning. Instead, he ordered them transferred to different sectors, telling himself it was merely an administrative efficiency. Meanwhile, Luna had become an unofficial ambassador among the human prisoners in the ship's detention levels. The guards reported that her singing had somehow improved cooperation among the humans, reducing violent incidents by 70%. More troubling, several guards had requested extended shifts in those areas. "She's teaching them her songs," reported Captain Zara, one of his most loyal officers. "The other human prisoners are beginning to sing as well. It's affecting morale among our personnel." That night, Vaxen made a decision that would have seemed impossible weeks earlier. He went to Luna's quarters not as an emperor conducting research, but as someone seeking something he couldn't name. Luna sat by her small window, looking out at the starfield beyond. When she saw him, she smiled with genuine warmth that sent unfamiliar sensations cascading through his nervous system. "Hello, Your Majesty," she said. "Would you like to sit with me? The stars are very pretty tonight." Vaxen found himself folding his massive frame onto the floor beside her, his usual regal posture abandoned. Together they looked out at the cosmos he had spent his life conquering. "Luna," he said carefully, "what is it like to feel?" The question surprised him as much as it did her. Luna thought for a moment, swinging her legs from her chair. Well, she said, sometimes feelings hurt. Like when I think about my mama and papa. But sometimes they feel warm and bright, like when I sing or when someone smiles at me. And sometimes they feel big and overwhelming, like when I look at all those stars and think about how many there might be. My people eliminated such inefficiencies long ago, Vaxon said. But the words felt hollow. That sounds lonely, Luna said simply. The observation hit him like a plasma blast. Lonely, yes. That was the sensation that had been growing inside him, an ache of isolation that no amount of power or control could fill. For the first time in his existence, he understood that efficiency came at a cost. Will you teach me more songs? He asked, the request feeling both foreign and necessary. Luna's face lit up. Of course. But you have to promise to really listen. Not just with your ears, but with your heart. I'm not certain I have one anymore, Vaxon admitted. Everyone has one, Luna said with the absolute certainty of childhood. Sometimes they just get buried under other things. She began to sing a lullaby her grandmother had taught her about travelers finding their way home by following starlight. As her voice filled the small chamber, Vaxon felt something he had never experienced. Tears. The salty drops rolling down his scaled cheeks should have been impossible. Zephyrian physiology had been modified to eliminate such responses. Yet here he was, weeping for the first time in 1,000 years, mourning not just his own lost capacity for feeling, but the emotional wasteland his entire civilization had become. When Luna finished singing, she reached out and gently touched one of his tears with her small finger. See? She said softly. You do have a heart. It was just waiting for the right song to wake it up. As if summoned by their conversation, General Krex's voice crackled through the comm system. Your Excellency, we're receiving reports from across the fleet. Discipline issues are spreading. Soldiers are abandoning posts to listen to human music. Some have even begun attempting to create their own musical sounds. I request permission to implement immediate neural reconditioning protocols across all affected personnel. Vaxon looked at Luna, then at his own reflection in the chamber's metallic walls. For the first time in his reign, he understood the magnitude of what he had to choose between: the cold perfection of the empire he had known, or something entirely new and terrifying and beautiful. Negative. General, he said, surprising himself with his certainty. I'll handle this personally. As Krex signed off with barely concealed frustration, Vaxon realized that whatever was happening to his forces wasn't a breakdown of discipline. It was an awakening, and he was about to make a choice that would either transform the greatest empire in the galaxy or destroy it completely. Word of the Emperor's strange behavior spread through the fleet like wildfire. Officers who had served Vaxon for centuries found themselves questioning orders they would have followed without hesitation just days before. The rigid hierarchy that had held the Zephyrian Empire together for millennia began to show hairline fractures. Commander Thax, leader of the 3rd Battle Squadron, was among the first to openly voice his concerns. During a senior staff meeting, his scales flickered with the amber patterns that indicated deep distress. Your Excellency, he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of military tradition, the humans are having a dangerous effect on our forces. Lieutenant Vex was found yesterday attempting to hum one of their melodies while on duty. Ensign Kara has requested reassignment to Earth's surface, claiming she wants to understand their musical culture better. This is unprecedented in Imperial history. Vaxon studied the faces around the conference table. Each of his senior officers displayed varying degrees of concern, confusion, and something else, something that looked almost like hunger. They felt it too, he realized. The crack in their emotional conditioning that Luna's songs had opened in him was spreading to others. Perhaps, Vaxon said carefully, we should consider why our personnel are drawn to these human expressions. General Krex slammed his clawed hand against the table, his scales flashing danger red. Because it's a weakness. These humans are infecting us with their emotional instability. Every moment we delay proper reconditioning protocols, we risk the integrity of the entire fleet. Or perhaps, came a small voice from the chamber's entrance, You're remembering what it feels like to be alive. Everyone turned to see Luna standing in the doorway, flanked by two guards who looked distinctly uncomfortable. The child walked into the room with complete confidence, apparently unimpressed by the assembled might of the Zephyrian military command. "How did you?" Krex began. But Luna interrupted him. "Your guards like my songs too," she said matter-of-factly. "They brought me here because I asked nicely and sang them the one about brave protectors finding peace." Vaxen should have been furious at the security breach. Instead, he found himself curious about what Luna would say to his most hardened military officers. "Continue, child." Luna looked around the room at the towering Zephyrian warriors, each capable of destroying entire cities with their weapons. She showed no fear, only the same compassionate interest she'd shown Vaxon. "You're all scared," she observed. "Not of me, but of what you're feeling inside. My teacher back home used to say that fear usually means something important is about to happen." Commander Thax leaned forward, his tactical mind engaged despite his obvious discomfort. "What do you mean by feeling inside, human child?" "Well," Luna said, settling cross-legged on the floor as if she were in her old classroom rather than a military briefing, "when I sing, I can see it in your faces. You remember things. Happy things, sad things, things that make you want to help people instead of hurt them. That's what feelings are. They're like colors for your thoughts." "Feelings are inefficient," stated Colonel Marn, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "They cloud judgment and lead to poor tactical decisions." Luna tilted her head. "Do they? Or do they help you make better choices?" She began to hum a simple melody, and Vaxen watched in fascination as the entire command staff responded. Scales shifted to softer hues. Aggressive postures relaxed, and for a moment, the war room felt like something else entirely, a gathering place where beings could exist together without dominance or submission. "Stop," whispered Lieutenant Colonel Seeks. But he made no move to physically interrupt Luna's humming. "Please, I remember my broodmate. Before the separation protocols. We used to make sounds together, harmonies." "I had forgotten." His words trailed off, and several officers turned to stare at him. Zephyrian military doctrine demanded that family bonds be severed during adolescent military training. Efficiency required that soldiers feel loyalty only to the Empire. "That's beautiful," Luna said, pausing her humming. "Would you like to try making sounds together again?" Before anyone could object, Seeks began to produce a low, resonant tone from deep in his chest. It was nothing like human music, more akin to the harmonic vibrations of crystal formations, but when Commander Thax tentatively added his own voice, creating an otherworldly chord, the effect was electrifying, one by one. Other officers joined in, their voices creating a complex, alien harmony that seemed to unlock something primal in their species' memory. Even Krex, despite his obvious resistance, found himself adding a bass note that anchored the entire composition. Vaxon listened in amazement, as his command staff, the most disciplined, emotionally suppressed individuals in the galaxy ray, discovered their capacity for collective expression. When the improvised song finally faded, the silence was heavy with possibility. "This is what we lost," Vaxon said quietly. "This is what we traded for efficiency." Krex struggled to regain his composure, his scales still flickering with involuntary patterns of emotional response. "Your Excellency, even if these experiences have some value, we cannot simply abandon 3,000 years of imperial doctrine. The fleet, the territories, the entire structure of our civilization depends on order and discipline. Does it?" Luna asked. She stood and walked to the chamber's view screen where Earth hung in space below them. "Or does it depend on choosing to work together because you want to, not because you have to?" She pointed at the planet. "Look how beautiful it is. You came here to take things from my people, but what if you stayed to learn from them instead? What if you taught them your songs and they taught you theirs? What if instead of conquering, you tried making friends?" The suggestion was so alien to everything the Zephyrians understood about interstellar relations that several officers actually stepped backward, as if Luna had suggested breathing vacuum, but Vaxon found himself staring at Earth with new eyes. For 3 millennia, his people had approached every new world as a resource to be exploited, every species as a labor force to be managed. They had built the greatest empire in galactic history by systematically stripping themselves of the capacity to see other beings as anything more than assets. Now, looking at the blue world below, he wondered what wonders they might have discovered if they had arrived as explorers instead of conquerors. What music might the universe contain if they had listened instead of commanded? "General Krex," he said finally, "cancel all neural reconditioning orders. Instead, I want voluntary cultural exchange programs established between our personnel and the human population. Any soldier who wishes to participate in musical activities is to be granted permission to do so." The war room erupted in stunned silence. Then, slowly, Luna began to clap her hands in delight. "This is going to be wonderful," she said with absolute certainty. "Wait until you hear what happens when humans and dragons sing together." The transformation began slowly, then accelerated beyond anyone's expectations. Within a week of Vaxon's decree, makeshift concert areas appeared throughout the Zephyrian fleet. Human prisoners, no longer treated as mere resources, found themselves working alongside their former captors to create music that neither species could have imagined alone. Dr. Sarah Chun, a musicologist from Stanford who had been captured during the initial invasion, became an unofficial liaison between the two species. She worked with Zephyrian scientists to understand the harmonic frequencies that seemed to unlock their suppressed emotions, while teaching them the mathematical structures underlying human music. "It's remarkable," she told Vaxon during one of their sessions. Luna sat nearby, often serving as a translator when the emotional concepts became too complex for either species to understand fully. "Your people's vocal cords can produce frequencies across a much wider range than humans. When combined with our melodic sensibilities, the results are unlike anything in Earth's musical history." Vaxon nodded, though his attention was divided. Reports from across his fleet painted a picture of unprecedented change. Soldiers who had been emotionless automatons for decades were rediscovering creativity, empathy, and something approaching joy. But the transformation came with challenges he hadn't anticipated. Commander Thax had requested a meeting to discuss what he termed operational complications. When he arrived at Vaxon's chambers, his scales showed patterns of stress that hadn't been seen in the Imperial military for centuries. "Your Excellency," Thax began, "the cultural exchange programs are producing unexpected results. Several of our personnel have formally requested to remain on Earth permanently. Others have asked to bring human families aboard their assigned vessels. Lieutenant Vex has actually proposed establishing a joint colony where both species could live together. Are these requests disruptive to military operations?" Vaxon asked. "That's the problem, sir. They're not. Productivity has actually increased in most sectors. Soldiers are more creative in problem-solving, more cooperative in team activities, and combat effectiveness has improved significantly. It's as if recovering their emotional capacity has made them better at everything, not worse." The revelation troubled Vaxon more than he wanted to admit. Everything the Empire had believed about emotional efficiency appeared to be wrong. The Zephyrians hadn't just lost their feelings, they had crippled their own potential. Luna looked up from her drawing tablet, where she had been sketching pictures of humans and Zephyrians working together. "Why does that surprise you? When you care about something, you try harder to protect it." Her innocent observation cut to the heart of the matter. The Empire had created perfect soldiers who felt nothing for what they fought to defend. But these new Zephyrians, with their restored capacity for attachment and emotion, fought with a passion and effectiveness their predecessors had never achieved. Communication from the outer system interrupted Vaxon's thoughts. Fleet Admiral Korath, commanding the Empire's Second Fleet, appeared on the main display. His scales were the cold silver gray of traditional Imperial authority, and his voice carried the mechanical precision of the old ways. "Emperor Vaxon," Korath began, his image crackling across space from 12 light-years away, "the Imperial Senate has reviewed your recent reports with significant concern. Your experimental protocols on Earth are being viewed as evidence of contamination by alien influences. The Senate has voted to dispatch a correction fleet to restore proper imperial doctrine. Vaxon felt his scales shift to warning colors before he could control the response. By whose authority? The Emergency Powers Act of the 2847th year. When an emperor shows signs of compromise by foreign influences, the Senate may intervene for the preservation of imperial integrity. You have 72 hours to restore normal operational parameters or face replacement. The transmission ended, leaving Vaxon staring at the blank screen. Luna slipped her small hand into his massive clawed one. "Are you scared?" she asked. "Yes," he admitted, surprising himself with the honesty. The old Vaxon would never have acknowledged fear, even to himself. "That's okay," Luna said. "Scared means you care about what happens next. What do you care about most?" Vaxon looked around his chambers, transformed by weeks of cultural exchange into something that resembled both a command center and an art gallery. Human drawings hung beside Zephyrian crystal sculptures. Music sheets covered with both human notation and Zephyrian harmonic patterns lay scattered across his work surfaces. He realized that, for the first time in his 1,000-year existence, he had something worth fighting for beyond mere duty or territorial expansion. He had discovered what his people could become when they chose connection over conquest. "I care about protecting what we've built here," he said. "But the correction fleet will arrive with enough firepower to destroy both Earth and this entire task force." "Then we don't fight them with weapons?" Luna suggested. "We fight them with music." The idea was so audacious that Vaxon's first instinct was to dismiss it. But as he considered the changes that music had wrought in his own forces, a plan began to form. The correction fleet would arrive expecting to find contaminated personnel who needed reconditioning. Instead, they would encounter something the Empire had never prepared for: Zephyrians who had chosen to change. Over the next 2 days, Vaxon worked with Dr. Chun, Luna, and his transformed officers to develop what they called the Harmony Protocol. Every ship in his fleet would broadcast a carefully crafted musical composition that combined the most emotionally resonant elements of both human and Zephyrian musical traditions. The goal isn't to attack them, Vaxon explained to his assembled captains. It's to remind them what they've forgotten. Every Zephyrian carries genetic memories of what we were before the emotional suppressions. The right harmonic frequencies should be able to access those memories. Captain Zara, her scales now displaying subtle artistic patterns that would have been forbidden under old imperial doctrine, raised a concern. What if it doesn't work? What if Admiral Korath's forces are too conditioned to respond? Luna stood on a platform so she could be seen by all the assembled officers. Then at least we'll have tried something beautiful instead of something destructive. And maybe that's enough. As the correction fleet's approach signals appeared on long-range sensors, Vaxon gave the order to begin the Harmony Protocol. Across his entire task force, voices of two species joined together in a song that had never been sung before, a melody that spoke of loss and recovery, of fear and hope, of the courage required to choose feeling over emptiness. The sound that emerged was neither human nor Zephyrian, but something entirely new. It was the voice of possibility itself. BROADCAST across the void toward ships full of beings who had forgotten they were capable of wonder. In 72 hours, Vaxon would learn whether music was strong enough to save an empire from itself. The Imperial Correction Fleet dropped out of hyperspace exactly on schedule. 300 warships arranged in perfect formation around Admiral Korath's flagship. Their black hulls gleamed with cold efficiency. Weapon systems already charged and ready to restore order to what the Senate viewed as a contaminated sector. Admiral Korath stood on his bridge, studying the tactical displays with the dispassionate analysis that had made him the Empire's most successful enforcement officer. Intelligence reports indicated that Vaxon's forces had been compromised by extended exposure to human cultural influences. But the fleet formations before him appeared normal. Perhaps the situation was less dire than Senate fears suggested. Open a communication channel to Emperor Vaxen's vessel, Korath commanded, but before his communications officer could comply, something unprecedented happened. Music began to flow across the void. It started as a low harmonic drone from the largest Zephyrian vessels, a sound that resonated in frequencies no human throat could produce. The bass notes seemed to travel through ship hulls directly into the bones of everyone who heard them, awakening something that had slumbered for millennia. Then human voices joined the chorus, adding melodic structures that transformed the alien harmonics into something achingly beautiful. Children's voices rose highest, including Luna's clear tones broadcast from Vaxen's flagship, weaving through the deeper Zephyrian resonances like silver threads through dark crystal across Korath's fleet. Impossible things began to happen. Soldiers who hadn't felt anything beyond duty for centuries found tears streaming down their scaled faces. Officers who had executed orders without question for decades suddenly remembered what it felt like to choose. Bridge crews who had operated as perfectly coordinated machines began to see each other as individuals with hopes, fears, and dreams. "Sir," Korath's tactical officer reported, her voice shaking with suppressed emotion, "the music appears to be having a measurable effect on crew performance. Efficiency ratings are actually improving." Korath's own composure began to crack as the Harmony Protocol reached full intensity. Deep in his genetic memory, ancestral voices stirred. He remembered fragments of lullabies his bloodmother might have sung before the separation protocols took him away for military conditioning. He remembered the sound of wind through crystal forests on his homeworld, before industrial efficiency had stripped them bare. "Shut down all communication arrays," he ordered. But his voice lacked its usual authority. "Block all incoming transmissions." "Sir," his communications officer said hesitantly, "the crew is requesting permission to continue receiving the broadcast. Some of them are asking to respond with their own musical contributions." The statement was so alien to military protocol that Korath actually staggered. His perfectly disciplined correction fleet was dissolving into something unprecedented individual. Zephyrians making individual choices based on individual desires on Vaxen's flagship. Luna watched the sensor readings with fascination. "It's working," she told Dr. Chun excitedly. "Look at their formations. They're getting less organized but more creative. Some of the ships are moving in patterns that look like they're dancing." Indeed, several vessels from Korath's fleet had broken formation to move in complex spirals that seemed to mirror the musical patterns flowing between the two fleets. Their movement served no tactical purpose, but it was undeniably beautiful. Vaxen received a priority communication from Admiral Korath himself. When the transmission came through, Korath's image showed visible signs of the transformation occurring throughout his fleet. His scales displayed color patterns that hadn't been seen in Imperial service for generations. Confusion, wonder, and something that might have been joy. "Vaxen," Korath began, then stopped and started again. "Your Excellency, I came here to arrest you for contamination by alien influences. But I find myself ... questioning the wisdom of that mission." "The humans haven't contaminated us, Admiral," Vaxen replied. "They've reminded us of what we chose to forget." "My orders are clear," Korath said, but uncertainty flickered across his features. "The Senate demands restoration of proper Imperial doctrine. And what if Imperial doctrine is wrong?" Luna's voice came from off-screen, and Vaxen gestured for her to join the conversation. When she appeared beside him, Korath's reaction was immediate and profound. "A human child," he whispered. "You've been learning from a human child." "I've been remembering how to be alive," Vaxen corrected. "Luna, would you like to meet Admiral Korath?" Luna stepped forward with her characteristic lack of fear. "Hello, Admiral. You look like you have a lot of important responsibilities." "That must be very tiring." The simple observation hit Korath like a plasma bolt. When had anyone last asked about his well-being rather than his orders? When had anyone seen him as a being capable of fatigue rather than a tool designed for enforcement? Yes, it is tiring," he admitted. "I had not thought of it that way." "Would you like to hear a song my mama taught me?" Luna offered. It's about finding rest after a long journey. Before Korath could respond, Luna began to sing, her voice, transmitted across space between two fleets poised for battle, carried a melody of such gentle beauty that it seemed to transform the very nature of the confrontation. As she sang, reports flooded in from ships across both fleets. Zephyrian soldiers were laying down their weapons not in surrender, but in wonder. Some had begun attempting to create their own musical sounds, while others worked with their human companions to compose new harmonies. When Luna finished her song, the silence stretched between the fleets like a bridge waiting to be crossed. "Admiral," Vaxon said gently, "you have a choice. You can follow your orders and destroy something beautiful, or you can help us build something that's never existed before. An empire based not on conquest but on connection." Korath looked at his own hands, seeing the intricate scale patterns that marked his genetic heritage. For the first time in centuries, he noticed their beauty rather than just their utility. "If I choose to join you," he said slowly, "the Senate will send another fleet. And another. They will never stop trying to restore the old ways. Then we'll have to give them something so beautiful they can't bear to destroy it," Luna said with the absolute confidence of childhood. "We'll have to teach them to sing too." Across two fleets suspended in space, a revolution was taking place not through violence but through the simple recognition that feeling was not weakness, it was the foundation of every meaningful choice. And at its heart was a human child whose song had reminded an empire of dragons what it meant to have souls. The question now was whether that reminder would be strong enough to transform not just two fleets, but an entire civilization that had forgotten the value of its own heart. 6 months after the Harmony Protocol, the Imperial Senate faced an unprecedented crisis. Reports from across the galaxy told the same impossible story. Entire fleets were abandoning conquest in favor of what they termed cultural collaboration, worlds that had been brutally efficient. Resource extraction sites were transforming into places where Zephyrians and other species created art, music, and poetry together. High Senator Vorthek, eldest of the ruling council, studied the reports with growing alarm. The Empire's territorial expansion had completely stopped. Worse, several sectors were actually returning autonomy to previously conquered worlds, establishing what they called cooperative partnerships instead of occupation forces. "This contagion must be stopped," Vorthek declared to the assembled Senate. His scales were the pure white of ancient authority, unmarked by any trace of emotional coloring. "We face the complete dissolution of 3 millennia of imperial order." But even as he spoke, something unprecedented was happening in the Senate chambers themselves. Hidden among the traditional austere architecture, small musical devices, gifts from reformed fleet personnel, had been secreted throughout the room. As Vorthek continued his speech, they began to emit the soft harmonic frequencies that Luna and Dr. Chen had discovered were most effective at awakening dormant emotional centers in Zephyrian physiology. Senator Thyrix was the first to notice the change. Her scales began to show faint traceries of color as she listened to Vorthek's words about necessary reconditioning protocols and efficiency restoration measures. For the first time in her 400-year political career, she found herself questioning whether efficiency was worth the cost. "High Senator," she interrupted, her voice carrying notes of something that might have been compassion. "Have we considered that these changes might represent evolution rather than contamination?" The question sent ripples of shock through the chamber. In imperial political tradition, junior senators never interrupted their superiors, and the concept of questioning fundamental doctrine was literally unthinkable. "Evolution?" Vorthek's voice cracked with outrage. "This is degradation. Emotional instability. The very foundations of our civilization are under attack by the cultural weapons of inferior species." But as the hidden harmonic devices continued their work, more senators began to experience the awakening that had transformed Vaxon's forces. Ancient memories stirred recollections of art, music, and beauty from before the Great Conditioning that had created their emotionally sterile society. Senator Kelly stood slowly, her scales displaying patterns that hadn't been seen in the Senate chambers for 1,000 years. "I remember," she said softly. "I remember the crystal gardens on Zephyr Prime, before we harvested them for industrial efficiency. I remember the songs our people sang when we built things for beauty instead of just function." One by one, other senators began to speak. They talked about memories that should have been impossible fragments of feeling and creativity that had somehow survived the genetic modifications meant to eliminate them. The chamber that had been a monument to cold logic slowly transformed into something resembling a support group for beings, rediscovering their souls. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the transformation continued to accelerate. On Earth, the former occupation zones had become thriving cultural centers where human ingenuity merged with Zephyrian technology to create wonders neither species could have achieved alone. Cities that had been reduced to rubble were being rebuilt not just as functional structures, but as works of art that celebrated both human creativity and Zephyrian engineering excellence. Luna, now recognized as an unofficial ambassador between the species, worked with teams of architects and artists to design public spaces that incorporated musical elements into their very structure. Buildings that hummed in harmony with the wind, bridges that created melodies when people walked across them, and parks where the arrangement of trees and water features produced natural symphonies. Dr. Chun had established the Institute for Interspecies Harmony, where researchers from dozens of worlds studied the intersection of music, emotion, and social cooperation. Her most significant discovery was that the capacity for artistic expression seemed to be linked to empathy, problem-solving ability, and even longevity across multiple species, but the most profound changes were happening within the Zephyrian military itself. Admiral Korath, now working alongside Vaxen, had implemented what they called the Compassionate Command Protocol. Instead of ruling through fear and unquestioning obedience, their forces operated on principles of mutual respect, creative problem-solving, and shared purpose. The results were staggering. Military effectiveness had improved dramatically, but more importantly, conflicts were increasingly being resolved through negotiation and cultural exchange rather than violence. Several potential wars had been prevented entirely when Zephyrian diplomatic corps, now trained in both military tactics and musical therapy, had helped opposing species find common ground through collaborative artistic projects. When High Senator Vorthak finally managed to organize a punitive expedition to Earth, he found himself facing not rebellion, but something far more challenging to his worldview: success. The Sol system had become the most prosperous and peaceful region in Imperial space, with cooperation between species reaching levels that made traditional conquest seem primitive and wasteful. Standing on the observation deck of his flagship, Vorthak stared down at Earth and the mixed fleet defending it. Human and Zephyrian vessels flew together in formations that served both tactical and aesthetic purposes. Their communications channels carried military coordination intertwined with ongoing musical collaborations. "Your orders, High Senator?" asked his aide. But Vorthak found himself uncertain for the first time in his career. A communication request came from Vaxen's flagship, and when Vorthak accepted it, he found himself face to face not just with the Emperor, but with Admiral Korath, Dr. Chun, and a human child whose presence somehow commanded more respect than any military rank. "High Senator Vorthak," Vaxen began, "we'd like to invite you to hear what we've built here." "This is not a negotiation," Vorthak replied, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. The harmonic resonances from their transmission were already affecting his crew, and he could feel something stirring within himself as well. "No," Luna said, stepping forward with the same fearless compassion she had shown Vaxen months before. "It's an invitation to remember who you used to be before you forgot how to sing." And then, as she had done so many times before, Luna began to sing. This time, her voice was joined by thousands of others, humans and Zephyrian, the Sol system, adding their voices to a harmony that spanned space itself. The song they sang was new, composed specifically for this moment. It told the story of an empire that had chosen efficiency over joy, conquest over creativity, fear over love. But it also told the story of beings who remembered that strength came not from the absence of feeling, but from the courage to feel deeply and choose compassion anyway. As the music washed over his fleet, Vorthak felt the emotional barriers he had maintained for centuries begin to crumble. He saw his reflection in the viewport, ancient, powerful, and utterly alone. For the first time in his long existence, he understood what that loneliness had cost him. When the song ended, Vorthak spoke into the silence that followed. "I came here to restore order," he said, his voice thick with newly discovered emotion. "But perhaps what we built was never order at all. Perhaps it was just fear wearing the mask of efficiency. The transformation of the Zephyrian Empire didn't happen overnight, but it happened inevitably. Planet by planet, fleet by fleet, the awakening spread. The great war machine that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia gradually transformed into something unprecedented. A civilization dedicated to helping other species discover and nurture their own capacity for beauty, creativity, and connection. Years later, when historians tried to identify the moment when everything changed, they invariably returned to a simple image: a small human child standing before the most powerful empire in the galaxy, armed with nothing but a song her mother had taught her, and the absolute certainty that everyone, even dragons, deserved to remember what it felt like to have a heart. The Zephyrian Empire still existed, but it had become something its founders never could have imagined: an empire of artists, musicians, and dreamers whose greatest conquest was helping the galaxy itself learn to sing. And at its heart, in the place of honor once reserved for weapons of war, was a simple bronze plaque bearing Luna's words: "Everyone has a heart. Sometimes they just get buried under other things." The Dragon Emperor had remembered what it meant to feel, and in doing so, he had taught the stars themselves how to sing.